It is my great pleasure to introduce the next speakers. We have in my words, amazing. We have the amazing Arif Rahman. He's a Bangladeshi secular blogger. His writing has inspired a new trend within Bengali blogging to be influenced by a sense of atheism. Being based in the UK provides Arif with a sense of safety to do what he does so well. In addition to that, we also have Gita Sahgal, who I am personally fangirling over right now. Gita is the founder of the Center for Secular Space, which opposes fundamentalism, amplifies secular voices, and promotes universality in human rights. The former head of the gender unit at Amnesty International. And I know Gita's probably going to shy when I say this, but one of the things that, when I was looking at this, one of the things that stood out to me, and I was, one of the reasons why I'm truly fangirling over, is that the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, was Gita's basically great-granduncle. So I'm really excited. Without further ado, let's have a round of applause.
It's great to be here. I came here to the launch of the AHS convention when it first started, and it was so exciting to see a student movement that actually made space for atheists, humanists, and secularists, because that space is being squeezed in a country that is largely secular, and where people can easily live without faith. We're seeing more and more people who are finding it hard to do that. So I'm really happy to be here today with you, Arif. Arif is a blogger and vlogger.
Recently, yes.
Well, not quite so recently, but I want you to talk about, actually want you to start with what you're currently doing and how you're...
Can I have that one? When I said thanks for inviting us here again to AHS, and thanks for everyone who's already here, and many thanks to BHA and Andrew Cobson. The question to Gita is, when I say it recently, I've been a blogger for the last, say, 10 years now, but the vlogger who is kind of expanding into video blogging is a recent thing. So that's, I think, the vlogging thing, I think, is this one, is my YouTube channel where I have this new way of actually expanding conversation by inviting people in my discussions. And recently, the most popular one is in Bangladesh, there's a new trend of Islamist creationists, and they are trying to kind of reuse the creationist argument to defy evolution and bring in their religious arguments. So we joined hands between a few science societies and did a 1-hour show about explaining evolution in Bengali. And if you go to my channel, you will be disheartened because most of the content is in Bengali, but my focus and activism has always been about the Bengali-speaking diaspora, because there isn't many people who's actually doing this sort of activism in Bengali.
But it started in Bangladesh, didn't it? This bloggers movement, which actually started raising questions around religion, science, rationalism.
It started because Bangladesh is the largest country where Bengali is spoken as a main language. A good part of India also speaks Bengali. So the blogging movement is obviously an internet-based digital thing, and it didn't only confine itself within the geographic boundaries, because cyber world is global. I was here most of the time, and a lot of people don't understand how can you be a blogger in Bangladesh or about Bangladesh while being here, because of the digital, no boundary. So because I wrote about Bangladesh in Bengali, my content was actually more consumed in Bangladesh, and my colleagues and my friends and a huge generation of young people read about what I wrote. when I say I actually should say we, because it's not only me. A huge number of colleagues worked together to actually create this movement. And that movement, I think, is one of a kind, because not many places, other than obviously English, has created enough defense against the Islamist arguments and the propaganda. So, and that's one of the reasons we became the target in Bangladesh.
Well, and I think what's interesting about it is that actually this movement started at a time when there's a lot of talk about counter-extremist narratives, being able to challenge extremism, being able to talk about other things. But most of those, particularly in countries that were majority Muslim countries, were aimed at religious reform movements. And a lot of international money went into promoting that kind of narrative, sort of Islamic feminism and so on, a lot of which was extremely uncomfortable for those of us who are secular and who are working quite often with religious people, but across religious lines and in the space of a secular movement. So this was something that was spontaneous, that was not backed by any government or
still not is
development funding or anything like that. That was just started on its own.
It's a proper a spontaneous grassroots thing, because I write about what I think is right, and then colleagues of mine writes the same way, and we write in our own space. Sometimes we go to community blogs, as they call them, and these days it's generally Facebook, and also we have other blogs. But the opinions and the information sharing that happens is not supported by anybody. And in fact, we have enemies like Islamists have got heavy funding, and they have a bunch of fake accounts that they try to attack us with. But it's because we make sense, we don't need any kind of.
But initially, you were actually allowed to get on with it. I mean, you weren't under the kind of threat. You're living now under a death threat. So how did that come about?
So when we started around 2006-07, near about the time when internet was available in Bangladesh, became more and more kind of publicly available. I know for people in the UK it's a shock, but Bangladesh is not that well developed in terms of technology. So when it came about, a lot of us, at that time, the political powers that were present, and the understanding is that Bangladesh is a secular country, and there are lots of atheists, and the kind of the core of Bengaliness is a tradition called Bauls, who they call them Manav Dharma, means religion of human, essentially humanism. So, and we thought this is fine. If I'm an atheist, I'm okay to talk about atheism. And if we see that Islamism is coming out from its mosque boundaries and stepping into the social boundaries and dictating us what we can do and cannot do in terms of cultures, we have the right to actually defend it and bounce them back, which we started doing. And that created a snowball effect, as in the young people. It created a huge followings, and young people were suddenly started to say that we are going to be atheist and we want certificates to hang in our. That's a gesture of pride and strength. And but in 2013 it all changed when first blogger was murdered. I think that's actually just out of this ISIS death threat in my name. Somehow ISIS knows about me. So the first guy at the very top in 2013, he died, and then there was a huge media outcry, and the whole system suddenly realized that there are atheists in Bangladesh and they need to stop us. So government ministers came out in press conferences, said, yes, we will try to deal with the deaths, but we also need to warn you, the bloggers, that you should not step outside boundaries. So in some way they started victim blaming, and things started rapidly changing in 2013.
More than blaming, they arrested bloggers and treated them like criminals, which was really horrific, because here were these people under death threat, and they were the ones being arrested. And I want to actually dial back and explain why this happened, and perhaps give you a little bit about my, why am I being involved with the issue of Bangladesh for so long? I come from India originally, as Hari explained, from generations of freethinkers. I don't normally talk about my family, but Nehru was a freethinker. He was a democratically elected politician who fought the British Empire, and he was himself, he was very proud of his Hindu cultural heritage, but he was also very conscious that India could not survive unless it was a secular state and that was plural and protective of its religious minorities, in spite of the fact that Indian independence took place at the time of a very, very bloody partition, where India was carved into two countries, India and Pakistan, with Pakistan being seen as a Muslim homeland, a Muslim country. India was not a Hindu country. It was a Hindu majority country, but it was established as a secular state. Now, 20 odd years later, in 71, on the east, Pakistan was on both sides, West Pakistan and East Pakistan, so carved out of what had been British India. On the east side, what was East Pakistan, there started to be a secular movement, which was a cultural movement initially, wasn't it? And I think the importance of the modern Bengali bloggers blogging in Bengali harks back to the fact that the East Pakistanis wanted their Bengali cultural identity recognized. And the first big political movement was a movement for the recognition, that broader cultural recognition of the language, which was not being recognized as a national language. But it became eventually an independence movement. We don't have time to go into the details of it, but what was absolutely key was that there was a genocidal attack launched by the Pakistani army, the West Pakistan, on the citizens of what was then East Pakistan and became Bangladesh. It was a massive attack, creating huge numbers of refugees, rather like Syria now, except that that war went on for 9 months, created 10 million refugees that fled to India. Many, many more were internally displaced. Hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people were killed. Minorities were specifically attacked, Hindus, Christians, Bangladeshis, as they are being now by fundamentalists. And what few people realized, and I didn't, I was in my early teens during that war, and I remember it very, very clearly, but what I didn't realize was that the Pakistani army had local collaborators, members of fundamentalist political parties, specifically the Jamaat-e-Islami, and those collaborators were the ones who formed militias and death squads, and they knew their local area because they were the students of the professors that they picked up. And so they prepared death lists.
They wanted to keep the Islamist union. So this abomination of country like Western India in between, the reason it was divided that way is because of religion. So India being Hindu and those two other small ones are Muslim. So the collaborators in Bangladesh were doing it in the name of Islam.
And because they wanted to make Pakistan a more theocratic state, which they eventually succeeded in doing. But they didn't succeed in Bangladesh. Although they killed many people, they picked up, in a forerunner to what's happening today with the bloggers, they picked up playwrights, professors, journalists, doctors, and so on, as well as lots and lots of ordinary civilians. But there were specific killings in Dhaka that was known as the killing of the intellectuals that happened when they knew they had lost.
2 days before the independence.
Yeah, they knew that the army was Pakistan army was about to surrender, and they carried out these massacres right at the end. And I made a film in the 1990s called The War Crimes File, which focused on 3 people who'd fled to Britain and had become very prominent in this country. And one of them is a man called Chaudhry Moinuddin, who was indicted at a war crimes tribunal that is taking place in Bangladesh at the moment. And it's in the context of that tribunal that the backlash against the atheist bloggers in 2013 started. So that, and what's remarkable about Moinuddin and another man called Abu Saeed, who's still alive, the third man called Lutfur Rahman was an imam in Birmingham, he's died. But these two people are considered prominent and respectable citizens in this country. They were put at the table with Tony Blair when the 2005 bombings took place. The mosque with they were closely associated, the East London Mosque, is now part of the condemnation of terrorism that's taking place in here, after the recent attack in London. But what they have done is solidly stood by the Islamist religious leaders that they supported, and they have issued leaflets. Do we have one of the leaflets?
I think this is the one leaflet that was distributed around March 2013. And it had, this is the front page, this is a 4-page multicolored printed leaflet, my name and my colleague's name on it, and they said these guys should be sorted out, and those were distributed outside mosques in London, East London and few other mosques.
So at the same time as they will condemn terrorism taking place in this country and act as partners of government, they have been actually inciting hatred against apostates. Now, I think the scariest thing about that is that actually we find that when Arif was under threat, and other people have been under threat in this country, and there are probably some among you who may have examples of that, we found it incredibly hard to get police protection for people who are being attacked by those who are seen as partners of the police. So this is not only atheists, and the atheists come from religious minorities as well. So many of the atheists came from Hindu backgrounds in Bangladesh. So Hindus were being attacked, and Christians and Buddhists were being attacked for their religion as being a religious minority. They were also being attacked if they were free thinkers or atheists as part of the atheist movement. And over here you have Christian Bangladeshis, Christian Pakistanis, or people who've changed their religion from one religion, so from Islam to Christianity. And you have the atheists who are under attack by fundamentalists. And we are fighting in the Center for Secular Space and with the Council for Ex-Muslims and with people like the bloggers from Bangladesh who are here and other free thinkers and atheists are trying to get the government here to recognize that this is a category of hate crimes that nobody is actually documenting and that there's very little protection available for. So that's where we are now, is that there is a high recognition of a terrorist threat, but actually very little recognition of that threat where it comes from people who want to wipe out the cultural traditions of not just of the West or Western culture, but the cultural traditions of the countries from which they've come, like the women dancing, the slide that Arif just showed. This is an attack on the local cultures and the lived religion as well as the lived atheism and free-thinking cultures, because those are cultures, they're not just individuals. They've been around long enough to be actually embedded as part of the secular culture of Bangladesh, which is at ease with its religious self as well as with its free-thinking and atheist self.
This is a celebration of Bengali New Year, which has got no religious connotation to it. Not Hindu, no Buddhist, nothing. This is just secular, celebrations. That thing I was showing to you earlier, looks fancy, but it's actually not anybody's production. It's made by the ISIS, and it was distributed. British counterterrorism actually got in touch with me recently saying that, do you know who do that? I said, I don't know. And they investigated and they took all the copies down, but there is a site called Site Intelligence. It's an American, like a body who keeps tab on these things. They forward me this thing. So it's quite scary, but I feel quite safe living in London up until a few days ago,
So I think we need to make some time for audience questions. But I'd actually like to say that Arif, because of the conditions he's in and the ongoing threats that there are, and with rising fundamentalism in the Indian subcontinent, which is also Hindu fundamentalism, we have recently there was an Indian Muslim being hacked to death, I presume by other Muslims, but there have been rationalists and freethinkers from Hindu backgrounds who have been murdered, presumably by the Hindu right. So this threat is there, and fanatic movements are feeding off each other. But I'd like to say to Arif, as he thinks that at the moment the pen isn't mightier than the sword, that I think that with your computer and your camera, I think with your computer and your camera, I think you are actually
we're trying to make a difference, and I think we are making some difference. But again, the governments and the international system is heavily biased towards the Islamists, and this is something we can't forget. I wanted to actually bring your attention to for a few minutes about the people who died over the last 2 or 3 years in Bangladesh. The first slide, most of they're my colleague. You know, I knew all of them. In fact, this guy was supposed to flee to Sweden. Sweden didn't give his visa, and in a week's time he was dead. And Swedish embassy obviously apologized, but you know, it is dead. But then a lot of other people started getting killed. We have Buddhist monk, Muslim kind of secular type of guy, university professors, general people who are not really known to be atheists, but they were still getting killed near the time. Because this is what I'm trying to say is, they will start with the atheists, because in a progressive movement, atheists are at the very front. They will start with them, and then they progress. The result is, Bangladesh government has Section 57, which is a blasphemy law, essentially says if they can incriminate you saying anything against Islam, then, not any religion, only Islam, then you could be put down for 14 years in jail, huge amount of fine, just because you wrote something. It is disproportionately high punishment. And that, you know, joined with the killings. So you're being killed illegally in the streets, government won't do much, but on the law side, they have blasphemy law, you know, making you afraid. So not a single people would even talk about things that are non-atheistic. For example, recently Bangladesh government passed a law legalizing child marriage. Essentially, if a girl who's not adult, who's been raped and who's like 13 years old, could get married to the rapist to resolve the issue. There's nobody. Generally, 5 years ago, people would be infuriated. Government would not be allowed to actually pass this sort of law. But now, people are dead, people are afraid, people are underground, so government can do whatever they want. That is what the killings are all about, to create a fear of atmosphere.
But that's being done in the name of fighting the terrorists. So that is a frightening thing, and this is the challenge that we face, that AHS faces as a society, that in the name of fighting terrorism, governments often take on the very religious values they should be opposing. Not the values of pluralism or tolerance, but intolerance. And they're actually also wiping out, they've changed the textbooks, they've dropped Hindu poets, and the Hindu traditions in Bangladesh, which Bangladeshis have been very proud of, they're wiping them out of their national narrative. So I think it's a very dangerous situation in Bangladesh for anybody concerned about civil liberties, including, of course, the liberties and the lives of atheists and freethinkers.
Yeah, here one thing I was thinking.
I think we need to leave some
just
time
one more
questions.
comment. I think it would be beneficial for the audience here, is that the right things can be uttered by anybody, but my point is, who's saying that it matters. So for example, anti-Islamic, or the stuff that atheists would say can also be said by, for example, far-right, racist movements, but doesn't mean that they're right. They're using those words to actually justify racism. So it's always important to distinguish between what the agenda is, whoever's saying. Humanist agenda is to make sure things are level, it's not discriminatory to anybody. That's my opinion.
So we have run over our time to speak, but I think there is a few minutes for questions. So there are a few minutes. So.
Okay, so I'm originally from Syria, and what we see is a rise of fatwas calling for or inciting the killing of atheists and the attacking. And what you've mentioned is the blasphemy laws and the illegal killing, but are there like fatwas or muftis that particularly call to get rid or to cleanse the Muslim lands of atheists? Like, are there like papers, are there sources to prove it as well on a legal point?
So in Bangladesh, because it's still classed as a secular constitution, fatwa don't have a legal value in Bangladesh still. However, the religious body, these days this is called Hefazat-e-Islami, they're the custodian of Islam. They can come out with posters like this with million mullahs marching behind them, and government would immediately listen to them. There was a list issued called the infamous 84 bloggers list. A lot of them are actually killed now. That list was actually a fabrication by the government and the Muslim Islamist joining hand. Government invited people to come in, and at some point they said, we want everybody to submit their problems, and government said these are the people who should be sorted out. So, but the fatwas are actually 15 years ago, there was a ruling in Bangladesh saying that fatwa is illegal because the secular system and they're obviously these days face to each other, but still they don't have a legal value or legal stronghold in Bangladesh.
But there are people issuing them, and there are people issuing demands for blasphemy laws, defamation laws, anti-religious minority, against Ahmadiyyas, that they have to be declared non-Muslim. So there's a set of demands in which apostasy and blasphemy are key, but there are also attacks on other religions.
Pakistan has sunk. Pakistan has got these Sharia things already embedded in their constitution. But Bangladesh is sinking, but slowly sinking, if that makes sense.
Hi. I was just wanting to ask what you think, if the increased use of the terms like Islamophobia and these terms that are thrown around these days about, especially in regards to people who are trying to, defend Western culture. What do you think? How do you think that has changed your case and how?
That's a very good question. The word needs explanation, but I don't think, again, the system and the media is interested in clarifying that term. What I think they're trying to say, or in people's mind, is that the racist fear of, for example, brown people, that should be called racism. But what they're saying, conflating is happening, is that they're seeing all brown people as Muslim, and then because Muslim and Islam kind of goes together, without understanding the context, they're saying hatred against brown people is actually hatred against Muslim, thereby it's Islamophobia. But
the Islamists use it as well. I mean, it's used
they're
very
the one
specifically
who
to stop criticism of Islam and not just
this is the thing.
discrimination
Islamists
against
try
Muslims.
to hide behind the general people. That's their strength. So anytime we say anything about atheistic views, suddenly a bunch of people who are going to start screaming and shouting, oh, you're hurting our religious sentiment, and then you are Islamophobic. So yes, we are against Islam as an ideology, as a political ideology, but that doesn't mean that we are against a general Muslim. General Muslim has his personal views, but obviously, the moment the Muslim becomes an agent of Islamist ideology, then we have a problem with that ideology, but not that person as a human. But nobody's interested in clarifying that because there are lots of benefit takes place under that Islamophobia term. I'm not supporting a term, and that term should be banished.
Anybody else with a question? Stephen, 1 minute.
Thanks. So you said before that you found it very hard to get police protection, and a lot of the problems you face to be acknowledged. Is it the case that it's very hard for you to get state actors to admit that you're at some increased risk, or are they fairly willing to admit this, but they're not happy to engage with perhaps the reason that you are particularly vulnerable?
It changed, by the way. In 2013, when this thing erupted, I think the understanding by the counterterrorism and police were not there. Gita, actually, we went from police station to police station together, trying to make a case with all that evidence. And the police, I remember one lady at the front desk, I'm assuming she's not aware of things, she would say, then why do you write these things? That was her argument. So, gobsmacked. So, but then earlier this year, I think actually late last year, Christmas night or the night before, two gentlemen appeared on my doorstep, very polished looking, and they said they're from counterterrorism. And they said, we found that video of naming you. Are you okay? And what we can do to help you. So I think that is end of 2016. Between 3 years, things have changed, I'm hoping.
But not for most people. I mean, fortunately, in your case, there has been some recognition.
Yeah.
But some of the earliest discussions we had, and this was with the commander of police, so it wasn't just a front desk officer. When these leaflets were distributed, they said, but there's no death threat there. They're just saying you're atheists. And I said, but they preach in the mosques that there should, that blasphemy and apostasy are punishable by death. They're not stupid, so they write a leaflet which doesn't which doesn't include a death threat in writing. They just say, here are the pictures of these people. These are the disgusting things they've said about the Prophet or the way they've criticized our religion. And then separately, they preach about, atheists.
So inside the mosque, the mullah would say, in our religion, if somebody says these sort of things, this is the ruling, so sort them out. And then on their way out, the mosque's, visitors or the musallis, they call it, they would be handed off leaflets, people doing their thing. In people's mind, connections are happening, but legally you can't grab them. And that's one of the reasons I think
police... You might be able to.
If you have a case, yeah.
There is a distinct lack of willingness by the police to even register cases. It's still going on.
Yeah.
And the Center for Secular Space, my colleague sits on a committee on hate crimes that advises the Home Office. So there are a number of, and this is, I think, future, it's an issue for us all to work together on, because what's happening is that in the early days when we started looking at racist hate crimes, there were monitoring bodies that would look at all communities. But now you have the Community Security Trust that looks at Jewish hate crimes against Jews. You have Tel Mama collecting them against Muslims. You have various other bodies. So it's been split up into individual, quite sectarian groupings. There's not an overarching body that will report any form of crime. And there's no body that actually reports on crimes against the sort of people we're discussing. And with the Center for Secular Space, we're protecting religious minorities as well. So it is very hard to even get a meeting with the police. It's hard to get individual crimes registered. And we have finally got a meeting with the senior Met officer. We've had several meetings cancelled, but we finally got a meeting. And now with this new attack, we don't know whether that will be cancelled or not. So I actually think there is a severe unwillingness of the police to actually take up these cases and to extend the protection that they need, in spite of the fact that there's going to be saturation coverage about the terrorist threat, that there are people on this soil who are not being protected sufficiently.
But protecting people is just a fix. We never try to go back to the source of the problem and sort that out once for all. I mean, how many people are you going to protect? That's my general argument. I don't really enjoy the protection. I say I want an atmosphere where there would be no need for protection, and we would be able to go about doing our...
Yeah, but not a single prosecution of that. So it's not, there are no registered... It's really hard to register a case or to get the police to prosecute. So we've had people told, why are you an activist anyway? If you have rape threats and death threats on Facebook and it upsets you, well, just don't look at Facebook, or maybe you should go off social media. That's the kind of advice. And I've actually been sitting there as an advocate with Arif and with other people, and basically been told to ignore things like rape threats, because if you're an activist, you're bound to get them.
If anybody asks me why do I do these things for the last 10 years without so much problems, I would say I do this to protect this, because this is against anything that Islam says. It's a bland thing. I think most of the religion, but this is music, this is culture, this is love, this is colors, that makes people feel human, and this has always been with us, and we are very fulfilling literature, culture but Islam is coming and then said, these are all haram, you're not allowed to do this, destroy everything, burn to the ground. So we said, no, this is not happening. We are going to see you through. Obviously, they have the bigger firepower, but we try to have the pen, but then in Bangladesh, it's not that mighty. But I think the reason it would help is if we can join our hands together throughout the globe, people like you, and understand and help. Intellectually, this might change. It's an ongoing war, intellectual war in some sense.
We've got time for one more question. Keep them wanting more.
Hi, I share also your concern about conflating race and religion with regard to the issue of Islamophobia. But I think in some sense, talking about blasphemy and the legal implications of that, I think there's been almost a sort of watershed moment in the last few days. The recent law, I think motion M103 in Canada, the recent Islamophobia law that was passed, essentially what makes this different from any other law is that it's not really, I assume it's well-intentioned and well-meaning, but what it does essentially is it prevents criticism not only of religion, but one religion in particular. So essentially it was passed by the Liberal Party, and the Conservatives wanted to introduce an amendment to it to include all subjugated minorities and groups. But what we have, but the Liberals rejected it, and it was voted unanimously, majority support. So essentially what we have is the first, just literally in the last day or two, we have essentially what is akin to blasphemy laws being implemented in what is supposed to be a secular country. And so the question now of Islamophobia, in a sense, I feel like this is a watershed moment because now Islamophobia is no longer kind of in the realm of conversation. We're actually seeing laws implemented now, very recently in Western countries that are, well, I mean, what do we do in that sense? How do we counter that when our own governments are beginning to pass laws that actually restrict our capacity for expression?
Yeah, I don't know how to respond to that because Trudeau, in some assessments, is gimmicky and everything, but there has been serious activism, like people like Tariq Fatah and another Bengali person called Hassan Mahmoud. They were quite active in Canada trying to prevent government from actually doing something like that. Because in Canada, because of the fight they were raging, Islamists were not doing good. However, again, the connection with the back-end connection with the governments and very high top, Islamists have the capability to maneuver and bring those laws forth. This Section 57 in Bangladesh we have, it was passed bypassing the whole constitutional system with a government, a presidential decree. They have power that we don't even can grasp. It's a very huge fight and it's expanding. So you're absolutely right. I share your concern as well.
We did end the formal blasphemy law that protected the Church of England. That it was a very long fight. And you're right, there are other laws coming in that are almost like quasi-blasphemy laws sometimes. So I think we have to keep challenging. We have to keep that space open and keep challenging and saying that there is a difference between anti-Muslim bigotry, bigotry against people, attacks on people, and indeed many ex-Muslims face exactly those attacks. Or in America recently, 3 Indians have been killed, 3 people of Indian origin who are Hindus and Sikhs have been killed. So when you have racism and racial violence being unleashed, nobody's going to actually ask whether you actually pray or not. I mean, it is discrimination against populations based on who they are, based on identity, and it's really important to oppose that at the same time as really also standing for keeping the space open for that debate about religion and being able to criticize religion.
It only takes one very smart investigative journalist to expose how that law was channeled through the parliament, what sort of money was distributed and how it was. If you can do a scoop somebody, then the whole media would collapse and the whole law has the potential of repealed back. It's not a public supported, law. That means...
You're talking about Section 57?
No, I'm talking about the Canadian one. So in the Western Hemisphere, these sort of laws are also progressive because Saudis, who are the actual funding supporter of this thing, they have huge money that funnel through different architecture, and those architecture needs to be exposed. And because
They
what
do,
it's
but I think it's more insidious than that. I wish it were just corruption. I don't think it is. I think it's a theory
it's
of
not
multiculturalism.
it's lobbying. Lobbying is in
it
some way.
But it is the theory that people have to be protected from offense if we're living in a plural society. That pluralism means being quiet about matters of critical intellectual
Media
debate.
can do a good thing. They can just separate between the political ideology and people's own belief. But media is not interested. They want to create this conflation, and Trump-like people can become president in that fog, misty fog.
And with that, we end that conversation. A round of applause for these amazing people.
Thank you. Thank you.